immigration to protecting our nation's security. We are mindful of the wide-ranging responsibilities and the sacrifices that are entailed in upholding those responsibilities, and we are deeply grateful to you and your team. The purpose, of course, of today's hearing is to review the Department's FY23 budget request. It's a request that focuses on strengthening the nation's cyber defense, responding to border management needs, promoting a humane and efficient immigration system, improving operational readiness of the Coast Guard, and continuing steps to advance climate response and resiliency. I imagine much of today's discussion will cover border security, immigration policies, and the CDC's Title 42 authority. Mr. Secretary, I am constantly demoralized by the tone of our debate about security, and in particular the tone of our debate about our border. Many of my Republican colleagues, and I frankly don't put the ranking member in this category, simply see the issue of immigration as a political cudgel. They see immigrants as political opportunities to be cast as threats, and they constantly dumb down the debate about immigration, for instance, insisting that the reason there are high numbers of undocumented immigrants arriving at our border right now is because of the name on the door at the White House. Let me assure my colleagues, non-citizens arriving at our southwest border don't care who the President of the United States is. Why? Because they come here for a complex set of reasons, most of which are connected to life back in their home country. We only have to go back to 2019 to see the evidence under arguably the most restrictive policies and programs in decades, policies that included separating little children from their parents and sending thousands of vulnerable people to wait months for a chance to seek asylum in conditions so dangerous that our own State Department issued warnings. Our country saw the highest level of apprehensions at the border in over a decade in 2019. And how did Congress respond? Well, Congress stepped up and enacted a $4.6 billion emergency supplemental in 2019 in order to provide resources to DHS and other departments to manage the border requirements that year. Why did that happen? Because at that time, there was a shared commitment to respond to the realities at our border, to support the brave, dedicated men and women of CBP, ICE, and countless others at the department working every day on the border or supporting those at the border. And that should be our mission today, as it was in 2019. Now, we can have an argument about when to lift Title 42, but it cannot be permanent, not unless Congress changes the law. And I find it ironic that there are so many Republicans that are so confident that COVID is no longer a threat to our country, except at the border. Title 42 is going to be lifted now or at some point in the future. And so we can play politics about this, or we can be in a constructive dialogue with you, Mr. Secretary, about funding a plan to allow your department to coordinate with other federal agencies and our neighbors to the south in order to optimally respond to the expected challenges that are going to result when inevitably this 2+ year restriction on U.S. asylum laws is lifted. Today, we should also talk about the work the department is doing to protect the homeland from 2 other threats. And I know there's a long list of threats, but at the top of my list would be domestic terrorism and foreign propaganda. Right now, the greatest present threat we face as a nation is domestic terrorism, and no one should forget how close we came in this place to a mass atrocity over a year ago, and nobody should think that this threat has suddenly vanished. So I look forward to hearing more today about what the department is going to do with new resources, with this new budget, to counter the threat from within our nation that is presented to our democracy. And Mr. Secretary, I know that you know that there has been a lot of misinformation about your department's work to combat misinformation. Frankly, I don't know why we would spend billions of dollars protecting the homeland without the capacity to protect our citizens from foreign actors and terrorist organizations who seek to spread hateful and dangerous propaganda designed to tear apart our democracy. But you should probably set the record straight about what the goals of your effort in this area are. Earlier this year, despite the odds, this subcommittee came together and we wrote a bipartisan budget that overcame all of these political pitfalls that I've identified surrounding this important set of investments in our nation's security. And that is in large part due to the tone set by Senator Capito and the great staff work that is done on this subcommittee to find a way to come together to protect our nation, despite the politics that surround this subcommittee's budget. I think that we can deliver again this year, and I'm grateful to begin that work with this important hearing. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for appearing before us today, and I will now turn it over to the ranking member, Senator Capito, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the hearing, and thanks to you for the tone and the collegial way that we've been able to work through some very difficult issues. Secretary Mayorkas, it's very nice to see you again, and thank you for your constant willingness to talk with me on all of these important issues, and all of us, really. Before we begin our discussion on FY23, Mr. Chairman, may I quickly say thank you to you for your work and partnership in getting this FY22 bill done, and I appreciate you working with me, and I appreciate the cooperation that we found to be able to find our way to what I thought was a good compromise. While we have much to talk about regarding the broad scope of the Department of Homeland Security, from cyber to disaster response to transportation security, discussions these days are rightly dominated by the crisis at the southern border. Last year at this time, there were those who said the numbers at the southern border were merely a seasonal surge, but the numbers have only continued to get worse. Since last year's hearing, we've broken records each month, and not just month to month, but compared to previous years and over a period of decades. Recently, we saw nearly 10,000 illegal border crossings in one day. Each crossing lines the pockets of some ruthless cartel that are poisoning our country and my state of West Virginia with drugs like fentanyl. They're using the money for that. To be fair and to your credit, we have noticed occasional efforts at real border enforcement and deterrence, and those efforts have proved fruitful when applied. But unfortunately, they've been kind of far and few between, in my opinion, and the challenges are only growing more dire. Still, despite the backdrop of an ongoing border crisis, we were able to come together last year to pass a full appropriations bill. That included an 11% increase for DHS, including key border security measures such as an increased Border Patrol hiring, doubling the amount for border security technology, and maintaining funds to provide for physical barriers on our southern border. Now we have your request for FY23 in front of us. I appreciate the administration is acknowledging the need for more Border Patrol agents, as well as a small nod to the need for more ICE law enforcement agents to deal with ever-growing non-detained docket. However, as a whole, the budget seems to focus more on climate change and a vague equity agenda while making the current border crisis worse. To name just an example, this budget asks for 9,000 fewer ICE beds. I will be asking you about this, I'm sure you know, cutting over 1/4 of your average daily capacity, and a large overall cut for enforcement and removal operations. Time and again, this administration and your department have told courts around the country that you can't properly follow the law's detention requirements because of limited resources provided to you by Congress, and yet you are here asking us for a huge decrease in ICE capacity. Last year in FY21, the department did a record-sized reprogramming, which flew in the face of certain congressional priorities and took money from throughout the entire department to plug holes created by the immigration surge. The 11% increase in FY22 was an opportunity to get this problem under control, but once again, it looks like there's funds that are going different places and we're not solving the problem. Mr. Secretary, you have said you will seek to cover additional costs through transfers and reprogramming. While I appreciate that you believe absorbing these costs within your budget is fiscally responsible, I'm concerned that transfers and reprogramming necessary to deal with the size of the crisis we're seeing at the border would stretch the limits of the other responsibilities at the department. We know that will be especially true if Title 42 is lifted. The department must be transparent about its use of funds and its burn rate so that we can carefully monitor this issue. The administration failures at the border threaten the work of the rest of the department. An aggressive use of transfer and reprogramming authority can harm the department's wide-ranging and so very important priorities. The work of the Coast Guard, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and the Secret Service, the TSA, FEMA, and other components and subcomponents are too important to be rated to cover for the administration's failure at the border. For these and other reasons, I'm glad we're having this meeting to dig further into these issues. I look forward to working with you, Secretary Mayorkas, and my colleagues on the committee as we monitor the department's finance for FY22 and also look to this next year's appropriations for FY 2023. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here.
Thank you, Senator Capito. And before I turn it over to you, Secretary Mayorkas, let me just take a moment to acknowledge that we lost an important leader in the history of the construction of the Department of Homeland Security yesterday. Secretary Norm Mineta passed yesterday. He was Secretary of Transportation during September 11th, and he did play a pivotal role in the development of the Department of Homeland Security, overseeing the creation of TSA. And so I just want to put that acknowledgement on the record as I turn it over to you, Mr. Secretary, for opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chairman Murphy, Ranking Member Capito, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to join you this morning. Chairman Murphy, allow me to echo your recognition of the extraordinary contributions of Secretary Mineta to the formation of the Department of Homeland Security. Every day, the 250,000 extraordinary personnel of the department interact with the public on a daily basis more than any other federal agency. While created to respond to a singular threat in the aftermath of 9/11, our department has remained agile, adapting to new challenges as they arise, as responsibilities grow and as our role increases in scale and scope. The fiscal year 2023 budget is a $97.3 billion investment in our capacity to meet the shifting threat landscape. The resources will give us the tools to protect our communities from terrorism, enhance border security, invest in a safe, orderly, and humane immigration system, counter cyber attacks, safeguard our transportation networks, strengthen disaster preparedness and resilience, and much more. On terrorism and targeted violence, the threat has evolved over the last 2 decades, and we meet this challenge by equipping every level of government, the private sector, and local communities with the tools and resources they need to stay safe. In 2021, for the first time, we designated domestic violent extremism a national priority area in our FEMA grant programs, enhanced training opportunities for law enforcement, and increased our intelligence and information sharing efforts. We are asking for additional funds to expand these operations. In the wake of incidents like the hostage crisis in Colleyville, Texas, we have increased our request for the vital nonprofit security grant program to $360 million to protect houses of worship and other nonprofits from terrorism and targeted violence. Under this administration, our department has been executing a comprehensive strategy to secure our borders and rebuild our immigration system. With the Title 42 public health order set to be lifted, we expect migration levels to increase as smugglers seek to take advantage of and profit from vulnerable migrants. We will continue to enforce our immigration laws. After Title 42 is lifted, non-citizens will be processed pursuant to Title 8, which provides that individuals who cross the border without legal authorization are processed for removal and, if unable to establish a legal basis to remain in the United States, promptly removed from the country. We started our planning last September, and we are leading the execution of a whole-of-government strategy which stands on 6 pillars to prepare for and manage the rise in non-citizen encounters. 1, surge resources, including personnel, transportation, medical support, and facilities. 2, increase efficiency without compromising the integrity of our screening processes in order to reduce strain on the border. 3, administer consequences for unlawful entry, including expedited removal and criminal prosecution. 4, bolster the capacity of NGOs and coordinate with state, local, and community partners. 5, target and disrupt transnational criminal organizations and human smugglers. 6, deter irregular migration south of our border in partnership with other federal agencies and nations. We inherited a broken and dismantled system that is already under strain. It is not built to manage the current levels and types of migratory flows. Only Congress can fix this. Yet, we have effectively managed an unprecedented number of non-citizens seeking to enter the United States and interdicted more drugs and disrupted more smuggling operations than ever before. A significant increase in migrant encounters will strain our system even further, and we will address this challenge successfully. But it will take time, and we need the partnership of Congress, state and local officials, NGOs, and communities to do so. To build on our ongoing work in this budget, we have requested funding to hire 300 new Border Patrol agents, the first increase since 2011, ensure the safe and humane treatment of migrants, and operationalize a new rule on asylum processing. We are requesting additional funds to counter human and drug smuggling operations, combat the heinous crime of child exploitation and human trafficking, and stop goods produced by forced labor from entering our markets. Finally, our mission set includes a series of other essential priorities. DHS, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, protects our critical infrastructure from malicious cyber activity, a threat heightened due to Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine. Our budget will expand our cybersecurity services, bolster our ability to respond to cyber intrusions, and grow our cyber operational planning activities. DHS, through the Transportation Security Administration, protects the traveling public. Our budget invests in paying TSA's dedicated personnel commensurate with their federal colleagues and ensuring they receive employment protections. DHS, through FEMA and other agencies, continues to answer the risks posed by climate change and natural disasters growing in ferocity and frequency. Our budget invests in adaptation, resilience, improved response and recovery, and more. We cannot do this alone. DHS is a department of partnerships. I look forward to working with this committee to carry out our wide-ranging mission on behalf of the American people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Again, let me pass along my thanks to your team, which is just doing extraordinary work every day to protect this nation. Let me try to level set a bit on what the consequences have been at the border while we have had the Title 42 authority in place, because I'm sure there will be questions at this hearing about it. First, Title 42 is a public health authority, not an immigration authority, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. That authority rests in the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC.
Therefore, when a person arrives and DHS exercises Title 42 authority against an asylum seeker, are there any consequences if they come again to the border, or are they just turned back around under Title 42 authority a second time?
Mr. Chairman, the Title 42 authority is imposed with respect to an individual who's encountered in between the port of entry, whether they are an asylum seeker or not, and I think that's very important. What happens is the individual is actually not removed. They are not in immigration enforcement proceedings. Rather, they are expelled. So they do not have a record in immigration enforcement proceedings, and therefore what we have seen is an extraordinary rise in recidivism because there isn't really a consequence from a law enforcement perspective. There is only essentially a turnaround. And so while the numbers are very high, those are numbers that do not reflect the number of unique individuals encountered at the border, but actually the number of encounters, including recidivism.
So let me give you an example. If you have recidivism rates in a particular sector like Rio Grande that are 45 to 48%, that means that in that sector, if you had 8,000 encounters on a particular week, roughly 38,000, almost half of those encounters, are going to be repeat crossers. Is that a sort of correct understanding of how this works?
Yes, without ascribing to the particular math, which would take me too long. But in all candor with this committee, which I will always have, the number of unique encounters has increased as well.
And I think that's just important for this committee to understand, is that when you see these elevated numbers on the border, much of this is frankly a result of Title 42 authority, which is essentially incentivizing individuals to come back over and over again to our border, because Title 42 does not allow you to set in motion a set of potential criminal consequences for individuals that present at the border. So that would be my last questions. If we get rid of Title 42 authority, return to sort of the foundational immigration law, there are both civil and potentially criminal consequences for individuals that repeatedly seek to enter the United States that are not available to you under Title 42. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, a court has recently ordered that, in fact, when Title 42 is in effect, we cannot use as fully as we had intended our enforcement authorities. But when Title 42 comes to an end, we will continue to enforce immigration law, both in the civil context and, as the facts warrant, in the criminal context with criminal prosecutions.
I'm going to have a few more questions related to the border in the second round, but let me ask you one additional question on another topic, and that is, as you mentioned, the elevated priority that you have placed on fighting domestic extremism. There's, as you know, a whistleblower complaint that was filed by a senior official at DHS alleging that he was asked to avoid intelligence assessments on white nationalists, amongst other topics. And this speaks to how fraught this work is, right? There are going to be Republicans, when Democrats are running DHS, who are going to worry that a focus on domestic terrorism and extremism will target voices to the right of the political spectrum, just as there will be those in the Democratic Party who will worry that if a Republican is in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, that the focus will be on those voices on the left, or they will ignore threats on the right. How do you build an enhanced domestic terrorism focus at the department that avoids these political pitfalls? How do you make sure that you are standing up capacities that look at threats regardless of where they may happen to fall on the political spectrum? Because the legitimacy of this effort is dependent upon your ability to answer the questions that come from both sides on this work.
Mr. Chairman, there are a few foundational principles that are extraordinarily important to articulate in response to your question. The department does not combat speech. The department is involved in protecting the homeland, protecting the security of the homeland. And we become involved when there is a connectivity to violence. That is our mission, and we have been executing on that mission for years and years since the commencement of this department. And one of the threats is the threat of disinformation. We see it from Russia. We see it from the cartels, the peddling of disinformation that threatens the security of the homeland. And when that threat is evident, that is when we become involved. And what we recently rolled out, albeit not as effectively as we had hoped to, was we rolled out an effort, a working group, to bring together the experts throughout our department to ensure that our ongoing work in combating disinformation is done in a way that does not infringe on free speech, a fundamental constitutional right embedded in the First Amendment, nor on the right of privacy or other civil rights and civil liberties. That is a core obligation of ours, and what we did is set up a working group precisely to ensure that there are guardrails and protections in place to protect those fundamental rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My first question is about your Disinformation Governance Board, which you have downgraded now to a working group. First of all, the name in and of itself has, I think, implications to all of us. I heard all about this all over the weekend, of concern of sort of an Orwellian, policing of speech. You yourself have even admitted, and you just repeated it here today, that the rollout of this has been vastly, you say, misunderstood. So I think, quite honestly, for the good of the rest of the department, that now is a good time to abandon this ludicrous and much maligned idea. I wonder, when you say that we have operational control of the border, is that definitionally disinformation? Because from a lot of our perspectives, we don't believe that is true. So it seems such a subjective and undefined what disinformation is. I would challenge you to punt this and rethink for the reasons that you mentioned, which are important reasons to try to deter violence following speech, to make sure that the American people really understand what's going on here. So if you want to make a quick comment, fine, and then I'll get to questions.
I do. Thank you very much, Ranking Member Capito. I certainly haven't downgraded this to a working group. That's what it is.
Well, it started
it's
as a board, though, right?
Well, we can discuss the nomenclature, but the point is that the work is so very important to achieving the mission in a way that does not infringe on free speech, on civil rights and civil liberties, on the right of privacy. Our work in this department in addressing disinformation that threatens the security of the homeland has been going on for almost 10 years. And so I asked the question, and we asked the question within the department, what efforts do we have underway? What policies and procedures, what standards of conduct do we have in place to ensure that that vitally important Homeland Security work is done in a way that ensures that it does not infringe on fundamental rights? And the answer was inadequate. And so we put together a working group to ensure that the guardrails are in place, that we have clear definitions, that we have good policies and practices in place to protect the very rights that also are our responsibility not to infringe upon.
These are very sensitive issues to Americans who believe fundamentally in the right to freedom of speech. You know that. And so I think the way that it's been rolled out, your explanation now, we have FEMA, we have CBP, we have CISA who work on all of these issues within your department right now. So I'm going to move to another issue. I want to talk about ICE enforcement and removal. We haven't been satisfied with the reports that you have generating now that don't give us, I don't think, a good sense of how many people are actually deported, how many people, whether you're deporting more criminals or not. You're arguing that deportations for aggravated felonies have gone up, but we can't get behind the data. So I'm asking you right now, will you commit to providing to this committee within 30 days all the raw data behind this report, at least to the extent that was provided in 2020, so we can compare apples to apples with previous reports?
Ranking Member Capito, most certainly, and I'm very disappointed to hear that you feel that you haven't received the data that we are obligated to provide to you in this committee. I certainly have some of it at my fingertips if you'd like to.
I think it's more of a case of reconfiguring how the data is presented, so we can't have an accurate view of where these numbers and how they compare to 2020. But we can work with you on this over the next 30 days as we'll get those figures. I want to ask about the ICE bed cut, because I think this is important. You have testified that you don't have the resources, or you've mentioned you don't have the resources to really detain and hold people. We know that we have appropriated last year 34,000 beds, but because of COVID, you only have those 75% occupied, which is sort of ironic in that Title 42 is going away under a COVID national emergency, yet the ability to use all of your detention beds is stymied because of the COVID requirements by CDC. So that doesn't jive at all. How can you, at the one hand, say you don't have the resources, and on the other hand, come in with a budget that asks for funding for 9,000 fewer beds?
Ranking Member Capito, first of all, we are awaiting new CDC guidelines with respect to our use of detention space, number one. And number two, I have to take a step back, because when we talk about, when we look at the challenge of the border, which has been an enduring challenge, certainly since the Department of Homeland Security was created, whether it's 24,000 beds, 25,000 beds, 31,000 beds, that's not going to address the challenge at the border. There's unanimity in the view that the immigration system is broken and we need Congress to fix it. That's the fundamental enduring response to the problem. In the meantime, what we are looking at, as I identified in our 6 lines of effort that define our preparation and plan, our months-long preparation and planning for the end of Title 42, the CDC's authority, gets to more fundamental solutions, working with countries to the south to ensure that they manage their respective borders, that they provide humanitarian relief and stability to people who qualify under their laws and repatriate individuals who don't. The challenge that we are encountering at the border is not ours alone. This is a regional problem. There are more than 1.8 million Venezuelans in Colombia. In the small country of Costa Rica, that population, the population of that small country is approximately 2% Nicaraguan right now and growing rapidly. This is a regional problem, and we have got to get to the heart of its cause.
And I would just add, I know I'm over my time, that deterrence is something that I don't think you've placed enough emphasis on. One of the deterrents is detention. Instead of putting alternatives to detention where you put a bracelet where there's 260,000 people in this country under this alternative to detention, and that number is growing, that's not a deterrent. And you stated over on the House side that you're deporting folks but after they have their asylum claims, but you didn't leave this is after 6 to 8 years after they've been in the country waiting for their claim. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I look forward to responding to that, Ranking Member Capito, because that 6 to 8 year period has indeed been a problem for years and years, not just in the past administration, all 4 years of the past administration, but earlier than that too. And we are the first administration to actually tackle that issue and promulgate the asylum officer rule that will take that 6 to 8 year period and reduce it to under a year.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here this morning, and thank you for all of the work that you and everyone at the Department of Homeland Security is doing in these challenging times. You know, everywhere I go, and I saw a report on the news this morning that we have about 2 jobs for every worker in the United States who's interested in working right now, who's unemployed. And there is a connection, I believe, between the most restrictive immigration policies, in my memory, that we've had for the last 5 years and our ability to get the workforce that we need, which is critical if we're going to continue to be competitive and have a strong economy. One of those areas of immigration that we have businesses in New Hampshire that rely on is the H-2B visa program. And I very much appreciated, excuse me, the administration's decision to provide 35,000 additional visas for the second half of fiscal year 2022. But I'm really concerned that despite having this announcement a month ago, these visas still have not been made available. And so we have employers who are looking at, for seasonal work in particular, looking at the season coming up. They don't know if they're going to have their visa workers, and for many businesses, these are workers who have come back year after year. They're not planning to stay in the United States. They don't take jobs away from other people who want them. And how do we move this along? Why has the administration taken so long to release these additional visas?
Senator Shaheen, thank you very much for your question about the H-2B program. We have actually moved with lightning speed in the promulgation of the regulation to issue 35,000 new visas in the second half of this fiscal year. That regulation is with OIRA now, and we expect it to become public within the next 2 weeks. We have actually moved as quickly as possible, and we have an extraordinary workforce dedicated to promulgating regulations as quickly as possible. Fundamentally, if I may, Senator Shaheen, here's another example of a dire need to fix our broken immigration system, including the H-2B program.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a disaster, and it needs fixing, and it needs bipartisan support to do that. I would just point out, though, it was my understanding that the visas were intended for employees to begin work on April the 1st, and we are way past that at this point. So for those employers who are calling our office saying, what's going on, where are our employees, what can we tell them that they can expect?
We expect the rule to issue within the next 2 weeks, Senator, and I will...
And what does that mean in terms of the ability of people to get here on the ground?
I will follow up with your office, Senator, to get you precise information so that the employers in your jurisdiction, in your state, have the certainty that they need to make their business plans.
Thank you very much. Our season starts Memorial Day, so we don't have a lot of time. One of the other concerns that I have is the continuing challenge of the opioid epidemic, which now is, as we know, much broader than opioids. It includes meth and other drugs, but fentanyl is the big killer that we're still seeing. And I know that you have included in your budget a plan to add additional screening of trucks coming across the border. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what we can do to ensure that we're doing everything possible to interdict that fentanyl and other drugs that are such a scourge on our population?
Senator, the majority of drugs that are sought to be trafficked into the United States are sought to be trafficked into the United States through the ports of entry. There is miscommunication with respect to that undeniable fact. The effort is not focused in between the ports of entry, but rather at the ports of entry. And we have intensified our use of technology, non-intrusive inspection technology, to identify when drugs are sought to be trafficked through the ports of entry. And we have a really unique effort underway that we are also intensifying forward operating laboratories so that we have the ability not only to detect, but to also analyze and identify controlled substances and interdict them. Our interdiction numbers are exponentially higher than they were in the prior 4 years.
And can that non-intrusive screening detect fentanyl, which is, can be in such small tablets, in any place in a vehicle that's
it is remarkable in its capabilities, and quite frankly, I was in Miami, Florida, but a few weeks ago, seeing it in action, and I, of course, traveled to the border 8 or 9 times during my 14-month tenure, and have seen it operating in other ports of entry along the southern border, and its detection capabilities are really remarkable. And I must say, so is the expertise of the Customs and Border Protection personnel who operate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you, Senator. Likewise.
I think you're a nice man, and I mean that. I am in awe of Ms. Jankowicz. I have watched her with slack-jawed astonishment. Who picked her?
Senator Kennedy, it's nice to see you as well. The Department of Homeland Security selected Ms. Jankowicz.
Who at the department picked her?
Senator, we don't discuss our internal hiring processes, but I am the Secretary of Homeland Security, and ultimately I am responsible.
When the department picked her, did it know that she had said that Mr. Hunter Biden's laptop is Russian disinformation?
Senator, let me repeat myself and add one other fact. I was not aware of that. We do not discuss the internal hiring process. Ultimately, as the Secretary, I'm responsible for the decisions of the Department of Homeland Security.
When the department picked Ms. Jankowicz, did it know that she had vouched for the veracity of the Steele dossier?
Senator, let me repeat myself and add an additional fact. One, we do not discuss internal hiring processes. 2, I was not aware of that fact. 3, as the Secretary of Homeland Security, I am responsible for the decisions of the department. And 4, it is my understanding that Ms. Jankowicz is a subject matter expert in the field in which she will be working on behalf of the department.
Yeah, I can tell. When the department picked her, Was the department aware of her TikTok videos?
Senator,
They're really quite precocious.
Senator, I was not aware of those videos. I, as a secretary, am responsible for the decisions of the department. The department does not discuss its internal hiring processes.
Well, how will this DGB work? For example, when President Obama said, with respect to Obamacare, when he said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, is that something that the DGB will investigate?
Senator, the working group that we named the Disinformation Governance Board does not have operational authority and does not have operational capability. But there's a more fundamental principle that really strikes at the question that you have posed, and that is that our mission is to protect the security of the homeland, and we address disinformation when it threatens the security of the homeland. For example,
okay, let me interrupt you, Mr. Secretary, because I don't have much time. I'd like to hear that example, and perhaps we can talk privately. I want to continue probing how your DGB will work. When President Clinton was being investigated for having an affair with a White House intern, and he said, I did not have sex with that woman, Ms. Lewinsky. Is that something the DGB would investigate?
Senator, again, let me be clear that the department's responsibility is to address disinformation that threatens the security of the homeland. And importantly, the working group was established because this disinformation work has been ongoing for nearly 10 years. The working group was established precisely to protect against the infringement on individuals' First Amendment rights, precisely to protect the right of privacy.
Can I ask you a couple of more before I run out of time? I think the chairman may let me go over a minute. I hope he does. Will the DGB be given its own police, its own enforcement powers?
Senator, as I have articulated, the working group does not have operational authority or capability. Its purpose is to make sure that the work that is underway in protecting the homeland, that has been executed for nearly 10 years, is done within guardrails according to policies and standards that ensure that that work does not infringe on people's fundamental First Amendment rights, right of privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties.
Right. Yeah, the government's going to tell us what's true. What could possibly go wrong?
Quite.
Can I ask you one last question?
Of course, and that is quite incorrect. That is quite incorrect.
Is the DGB going to accept referrals from the public where people can call in and say, I think Senator so-and-so said something untrue, and I want you to subpoena him?
Senator, it is so very important that I correct a misstatement that you made, that the Department of Homeland Security is going to be the truth police. That is the farthest thing from the truth. We protect the security of the homeland, and once again allow me to articulate what I have said previously, which is that the working group does not have operational capability and authority. It is to make sure that there are policies in place, standards in place to protect the very rights about which you inquire.
Mr. Chairman, this will be my last comment. Mr. Secretary, I meant what I said. It is nice to see you, and I do think you're a nice man. But I would call in as soon as you get back to the office, and I would ask that person who recommended Ms. Jankowicz to you, and I would fire him on the spot.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Good morning, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, as you've mentioned, equipping our Border Patrol with the workforce tools and technology needed to secure our borders is vital to meet the growing crisis that we face on our southwest border. And I'm sure you're aware of the CBP's light enforcement helicopter fleet is critical to providing surveillance and supporting Border Patrol agents on the ground, disrupting unlawful activity. The fiscal year 2022 omnibus included nearly $10 million for light enforcement helicopters. These funds will purchase 2 rotary wing aircrafts to replace the existing rundown helicopters. Many of the helicopters in the current fleet are near the end of their life cycle. Mr. Secretary, this year's budget request includes $20.5 million to support CBP's light enforcement platform aircraft. Will this include a focus on rotary wing aircraft? And have you been able to ride on one of these helicopters just by chance? And if not, I would like to invite you to do that. But my question is, will this include a focus on rotary wing aircraft?
Senator, I do not know the answer to your precise question, and I apologize for that, and I will follow up. I will say that we are investing in aircraft. We are investing in technology that is an extraordinary force multiplier to achieve border security. And U.S. Customs and Border Protection's air and marine operations is an extraordinary force in achieving that security, and its personnel are remarkable in their dedication and talent. I'll look forward to following up on your precise question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And like many of my colleagues, I've traveled to the southwest border and seen the work the Border Patrol agents do on a daily basis, an unbelievable task. We've heard statistics of border security operations under your leadership versus previous DHS secretaries. During the month of March, there were 220,000 encounters at the southwest border, 220,000. As Secretary of Homeland Security, would you consider the 220,000 migrant encounters in March a threat to the Homeland Security?
Senator, let me, if I can, articulate something. I'm not sure you heard me earlier this morning, that the number of encounters does not equal the number of unique individuals encountered at the border, because under Title 42, the CDC's Public Health Authority, individuals are expelled. They are not placed in immigration enforcement proceedings, and that expulsion and the fact that they haven't been in enforcement proceedings allows for a high level of recidivism. We have a responsibility to secure our borders.
So do you think those who were encountered is a threat to our Homeland Security?
Senator, allow me, if I may, that it is our responsibility to secure our border consistent with our laws, and that is precisely what we do. So if an individual is encountered at the border and makes a claim for asylum relief,
I understand that,
under our laws, and their claim fails before an immigration judge,
I understand
then we
that,
remove
but the number that
individual.
were encountered, do you think it is a threat to our Homeland Security?
I believe I have answered your question, that we enforce the law that Congress has passed. And the law provides that individuals who are encountered who do not make a claim for relief
So you're
are
not
promptly
answering my
respond.
question, though.
I believe I am, if I may, Senator. And so those who do not make a claim for relief and do not have a basis to remain in the United States, or those who do make a claim for asylum and whose claim does not prevail before an immigration judge, are removed from the United States.
But the number of encounters, whatever that number is, the number of encounters, do you think that is a threat to our Homeland Security?
Senator, I believe that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the extraordinary 23,000 individuals on our border now and more coming through our intensifying efforts, ensure that there is not a threat at our border through their enforcement of immigration law that Congress has passed. That is
You
what
don't think it's a threat to the Homeland Security is what you're saying.
Senator, I
and at
believe-
what point in your judgment does the growing number of encounters become a threat to our Homeland Security?
Senator, what I believe is that when the encounters that we are experiencing now are placing a strain on our resources, which is why we have such a comprehensive plan that we are executing to address that challenge. It has 6 border security pillars, 6 vital lines of effort that we have been executing on since September of last year. And if indeed we experience greater numbers, it will place a further strain on our resources. We are looking at how we could address that further strain. Some of those 6 pillars get to the heart of the matter, working, for example, with our partners to the south of our border so that they manage their respective borders.
But at what point do you see that it's a threat to Homeland Security? You're saying because you have these people in place that there is not a threat at this time? Because they're doing their job and they're in place, it's not a threat.
Senator, it is our responsibility to ensure that a threat does not materialize, and that is why we have such a comprehensive plan to address what could be an increasing challenge at our border, and working in partnership with countries to the south, not only to manage their respective borders, but to also tackle the transnational criminal organizations and the smuggling operations. But fundamentally, I have heard the articulation of a problem at the border and yet no enduring solution, because the enduring solution is legislation. And everyone agrees that the immigration system is broken. And so
closing the border would not be a solution.
Senator, that would be a dramatic change in law, given what the laws that Congress has passed.
Thank you.
Senator Hoven.
Just to follow up on Senator Hyde-Smith's question, you're talking about more legislation. Why don't you enforce the tools you have? Why don't you enforce the tools you have? Why don't you enforce the Remain in Mexico policy? Why don't you enforce the Third Safe Country policy? Why don't you keep Public Health Order 42 in place? And why don't you finish building the walls so that your border Customs and Border Patrol people and the Border Patrol can actually get control of the border? Why not enforce the laws that you have now instead of sit there and ask for new ones?
Senator, I'm grateful for your question, because we are indeed enforcing the laws.
The statistics would say otherwise. 1.7 million illegal encounters last year, more than 1 million in the first 6 months of this year. Are you going to sit there and pretend that's not going on and say that you're actually enforcing the law?
Oh, we most certainly are, Senator, and let me share with you how we are doing so. Because please remember that the Title 42 authority is not an immigration law. It is a public health authority that rests in the exclusive jurisdiction of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. The CDC decides whether the public health imperative compels Title 42 to remain in place or not, and they have made a decision.
You don't need to explain what it is to me. My question to you is, when the administration lifts it, and you're already at more than 1 million illegal encounters this year, what are you going to do? Because that number is going to go up dramatically. So you're content to let these numbers continue to escalate?
Oh, absolutely not, Senator, and allow me to share with you exactly what we are doing. Number one, we are surging resources, personnel, transportation, medical support, facilities. Number two, we are increasing and enhancing Customs and Border Protection processing efficiency through enhanced central processing sites.
Meaning you're just going to put people, so you're just going to have more people come across faster. Your plan is just designed to enable you to have more people come across faster. Is that what you're saying?
No, quite the contrary. Number three, we are imposing consequences, expedited removal, criminal prosecutions when the facts are warrant.
Let me ask you this question.
Four.
The Supreme Court told you to enforce the Third Safe Country Protocol. That decision came down in August. Why are you not enforcing it?
Senator, I'll have to get back to you on what the Supreme
Remain
Court
in Mexico
said.
and the third safe country, both those protocols, why are you not enforcing? Even if you disregard Public Health Order 42, which you're trying to do, why are you not enforcing remain in Mexico and third safe country?
Oh, we are enforcing remain in
How
Mexico.
many people under remain in Mexico have you enforced the Supreme Court directive to do that? Because last I checked, it was about 400 people total.
Senator, I will get you the precise data, but let me share with you a very important point that undergirds our implementation of the Remain in Mexico program, which is formally known as the Migrant Protection Protocols. We require the agreement of the sovereign nation of Mexico, and we have negotiated for the implementation of that program.
Which you said you had in December.
And we continue to implement it.
How many people have you required to remain in Mexico under that protocol?
I look forward to providing that data to you, Senator.
All right. Do you have preparations in your budget if Public Health Orders 42 is lifted, and how many more illegal encounters do you anticipate having? Right now, you're up to 1 million in the first half of the year. What do you anticipate when you lift Public Health Order 42?
Senator, thank you. So, first of all, allow me to express my appreciation to Congress for the appropriation that we received in fiscal year 22 to address the number of encounters at the border. In the service of fiscal responsibility and our responsibility to secure the border, we are utilizing those funds, and we, of course, provided a spending plan as to how we are doing so. We are also looking at what our resources are within the department.
The plan, the 6-point plan that you put forward is simply a plan to have more people come through faster and to process them quicker. It was not a plan to deter people from coming across illegally.
Senator,
let me ask you one other question.
Senator,
I was down in the Rio Grande sector last year, and I just got back a week before last from the Del Rio sector. And Del Rio sector is now overtaking the Rio Grande sector for having the most people crossing illegally, and they have far fewer resources than the Rio Grande sector. Last year, when I was at the Rio Grande sector, CBP officers said people were coming in illegally from 50 different countries. 50 different countries. This year, when I was down at the Del Rio sector, you know how many countries they said people were coming in from illegally? Do you know how many? Have you had the briefing? 100 companies. Last year, 50 countries. This year, 100 countries. How can you say what you're doing is in any way effective? And are you the least bit concerned that people are coming in here illegally from 100 different countries? You don't think that's a problem? You don't think that creates drug issues, human trafficking, risks of terrorists? Is that what you're telling us?
Senator, I have a number of responses, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I'm mindful. I'm not exactly sure how you can say that targeting and disrupting transnational criminal organizations and smuggling operations actually invites migration. I'm not exactly sure how you can say that deterring irregular migration by having partners to the south of our border interdict migrants and manage their respective
borders. How can you disregard the simple numbers, and that doesn't even include the gotaways, which could be another 40% more?
I'll let the witness respond, but the senator's time has expired.
And the point about individuals coming from different countries around the world underscores a very, very important point that I articulated at the outset, that the challenge of migration that the United States is experiencing is not exclusive to the United States. And in fact, it is not exclusive to even the Western Hemisphere. This is a global challenge. We have seen an unprecedented number of displaced persons around the world. And I know, Senator, I am confident that you would not have me propose that we return Ukrainians encountered at the border to Ukraine. This world is experiencing conflict. This world is experiencing economic downturn, violence in particular countries, authoritarian regimes. I am confident that, or perhaps I shouldn't be, that at least some colleagues would not want us to return every Cuban that we encountered at the border because of their claims of fear of persecution by reason of the authoritarian regime there. And quite frankly, it is that flight from that authoritarian regime that lands me here in this country, serving our country for more than 20 years.
Thank you.
Your Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection professionals will tell you
Senator Hoven,
they
time
could
has
secure
expired.
the border if you would enforce the tools and the laws that you have. You're not doing it.
Thank you, Senator Hoven. I don't see any other colleagues here. I have one additional question for you, Mr. Secretary. You've had a long couple of weeks. I think this is your last stop in preparation for the budget process. I wanted to talk to you about the investments that we're making in our ports of entry, because I think, as you correctly noted to Senator Shaheen, when it comes to illegal flows of goods, those flows move through the ports of entry, not through the points in between. Mexico has one single gun store, and it's on a military base. So it's not surprising that almost none of the guns that are used to commit crimes in Mexico come from Mexican gun stores. In fact, 70% of the guns that are used in crimes in Mexico come from the United States. 50% of the guns used for crimes in Honduras and El Salvador come from the United States. There is this vicious cycle of violence that exists whereby guns and firearms from the United States, illegally trafficked into Mexico and Central America, are used to commit an epidemic level of violent crime, which then creates the conditions upon which individuals flee to the United States and present at the border. It's just an absolute stunning number of illegal weapons moving from the United States into Mexico and down into Central America. How can the investments that you are asking for at our ports of entry help you identify the goods that are moving out of the United States into Mexico and Central America, in addition to the goods that are moving the other direction? What's the comprehensive strategy to try to deal with this iron pipeline of illegal weapons that are fueling the violence in Mexico and Central America?
Mr. Chairman, this is a challenge that I have addressed with my counterparts in different countries south of our border, and you correctly identify the flow of firearms south from the United States as a problem that we need to address and, in fact, are addressing. I would like to share with you that it is not only through the work at the ports of entry that we are tackling this challenge, but we are actually also doing it with our Homeland Security investigations personnel. We have a number of operations in place, and I would look forward to providing you with greater information given its law enforcement sensitive nature.
Great. Just two additional comments, and I'll recognize Senator Murkowski. No matter how many times you say that this governance board is a truth police or a censorship bureau, it doesn't make it true. It just doesn't make it true. And folks can try to make this out into something that it is not, but we got a serious problem with foreign misinformation in this country. And I guess you could argue that we should stand down and let the Russians pollute America with dangerous misinformation about the war in Ukraine. I don't want our government to stand down given those threats. And second, you were very careful in answering Senator Hyde-Smith's questions about whether these migrants present a threat. I'll just give you a data point. Immigrants to this country commit violent crimes at a rate much lower than that of individuals born in America. In fact, undocumented immigrants in America commit crimes at a lower rate than those that were born in America. That's not an aspersion on folks that were born in this country. I include myself on that list. It is just a fact of the matter that this notion that there is a elevated threat to the homeland from people who are seeking refuge and asylum in this nation, it's just a fact that the data suggests that, in fact, there is no greater threat, in fact, a lesser threat of violence from those individuals than there are from individuals who began their life in the United States. Senator Murkowski.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, welcome. I'm sorry that I haven't been here for much of the exchange. We've got multiple appropriations hearings going on, and I understand that you were asked a question from Senator Shaheen with regards regards to H-2B visas. As you know, we've had multiple conversations critically important to us in the state. The salmon are going to be hitting us in a couple months here, and we need the workers. And the H-2B workers have been a critical piece of how we're able to advance our strong fisheries. I do appreciate the announcement of 35,000 additional visas in March, but we're now into May. We still don't have a final rule. And again, we've got seafood processors as well as tourism businesses that need to apply for the announced visas. And I'm wondering if you have identified when exactly the rule will be released, the final rule.
Thank you, Senator. The rule is with OIRA now. We've worked as expeditiously as possible to get it out to the public, given the urgency that you have identified, and we well understand and echo. I expect that it will be issued in its final form within the next 2 weeks, and I will provide to you, as I represented to Senator Shaheen, more precision subsequent to this hearing.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I would just urge 2 weeks is really a long time for us, as I think I have made clear. So if that can be expedited in any way, I will look forward to following up with you to get more specificity on that. Very quickly, with regards to Coast Guard and icebreakers, we have been told that we are going to see a gap here with regards to the polar security cutters coming online as a consequence of what we have seen with delays last year. The President's budget includes procuring a commercially available icebreaker. I've been told that if it is purchased and if the Coast Guard receives the legislative request that we included in the Coast Guard Authorization Act, we could have a vessel operational within 18 to 24 months. So I'm just asking if you can commit to overseeing that timeline to ensure that we're not going to have this significant gap between now and 2027 when that first U.S.-made polar security cutter comes online.
I most certainly can, Senator. I well understand the importance of the ice cutters, and this commercially available cutter is a bridge to that period, and I commit to you to oversee the time frame to make sure that that bridge is delivered on in the fashion that you've identified as needed.
Good, I appreciate that. One more on Coast Guard then, quickly. The Coast Guard unfunded priorities list included requests for child care subsidy increases and additional funds to Kodiak's Child Development Center. We mostly funded that through the infrastructure law. I am encouraged that Coast Guard is prioritizing these, but it's curious that they didn't make it into the final budget. And as I'm talking to Coasties all over, but most certainly in Alaska, they are raising this as key to the retention. I'm just curious as to whether or not there was a reason that it didn't make it into the final budget.
Senator, I'm going to have to follow up with you. Forgive me, I don't know the answer with respect to the disposition of child care centers funding in the U.S. Coast Guard request.
Fair enough. We will look forward to a follow-up there. So you have recently confirmed that the department is in talks with the Department of Veterans Affairs to possibly divert resources, whether it's doctors, nurses, the like, to care for immigrants, some of whom who have entered the country illegally at the southern border. It seems to me that revoking Title 42 is going to be creating more problems than it will resolve, and if, in fact, this proposal moves forward, it's going to be the veterans that would pay the price. In Alaska, we have significant shortages in key areas within our VA system. So the question is why the department would ask the VA to reallocate resources with regards to doctors and nurses that are taking care of our vets, particularly when they are in overstretched in an overstretched VA system right now. Can you tell me why we're even considering this at all?
Senator, I didn't know the answer at the time in my prior hearing. I know the answer this morning, and we are not making that request of the Veterans Affairs Department, and the Veterans Affairs Department will not be allocating resources to the border.
That will be a huge relief to the veterans in my state. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Senator Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Secretary Mayorkas. Good
morning.
to see you. In recent years, Congress has appropriated substantial funding to reduce the backlogs at USCIS. Those backlogs can mean a work authorization does not get renewed in time and an applicant falls out of status, and it could mean losing a job and being at risk of deportation just because of bureaucratic delays. We need an immigration system that works. So how has USCIS used that funding to reduce the backlog?
Senator, your question goes to a very important and significant challenge that we are encountering. And it's not just that we inherited a broken immigration system, but we inherited a broken immigration system that was also dismantled. And the agency responsible for work authorizations, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, was on the brink of bankruptcy. And it is funded, as you well know, and we have discussed in the past, through fee rules. And we are working on a fee rule to fund that agency. In addition, the agency just announced the promulgation of a rule to extend work authorization precisely for the reason that you have identified. We are also, of course, requesting appropriated dollars to assist us in working through the backlog, additional dollars in the fiscal year 2023 President's budget.
Yeah, I saw that, and I appreciate it. And what strategies are in place to make sure that that funding is used effectively to reduce those backlogs?
It's a multi-pronged approach, Senator Murray. It is additional personnel, it is processing efficiency, and it is efforts like the rule that is being promulgated to provide relief so that there isn't a gap in individuals' ability to continue to work when the law so permits them.
Okay. And I was really glad to see the administration request less funding for detention beds in this budget. This is a step in the right direction, and I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to fix our broken immigration system. But I continue to hear that immigrants in detention centers are unable to have confidential conversations with their lawyers, send requested documents in a timely manner, or even have access to a functioning phone. Among the existing issues at detention centers, the lack of access to counsel really is unacceptable. And I wanted to ask you today, how is the department making sure that individuals in detention centers have access to counsel?
Senator Murray, I've addressed this issue as recently as earlier this week. First, allow me to say that the conditions in detention facility, compliance with our standards of detention, has been an area of focus under this administration. And in fact, we have closed or curtailed the operations of facilities that have been consistent failures in adhering to our system. I spoke earlier this week with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, as well as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, about delivering greater access to counsel for people in facilities, how we can provide a greater level of space for private consultations, how we can have greater connectivity, whether through telephone or internet. We are looking at all of the options with great urgency.
Okay, I appreciate that. And finally, let me just turn to the asylum process. We need to be doing everything we can to reduce barriers to access, especially for people in more rural areas. One way to do that for people in my home state of Washington would be to conduct the asylum interviews in USCIS's field offices. Have you considered having asylum officers travel to field offices to conduct those interviews?
Senator, I will get back to you with respect to that particular proposal. I know that we are looking at a number of different ways of enhancing the efficiency of the asylum system. The asylum officer rule that we promulgated and which will go into effect at the end of this month is one important step. I will follow up. The Asylum Officer Corps has, of course, over the last year or so struggled given the COVID restrictions. Yeah. But I will need to get back to you on that particular proposal.
Find out for me and see if there's any barriers that prevent the department from doing that. I think that would be a great relief to a lot of folks.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tester.
Alejandro Mayorkas, good to have you in front of us.
Good morning, Senator. Great to see you.
Are you having fun yet?
Senator, I am very fulfilled and very challenged and very proud to work alongside incredible people in the department.
Thanks for your work. Thanks for being here. It's a tough job, maybe the toughest job in the federal government right now. There was a plan released. It says that DHS will continue to augment CBP operations by bringing in law enforcement agents and officers from other parts of the country as needed. I've got a 550-mile border with Canada. Are we talking about reassigning northern agents to the southern border?
Senator, we have indeed employed TDY of agents from the northern border. We are very mindful of the need to keep the northern border secure. We've made those decisions with that critical mission in mind, and I should say that I've also worked very closely with our counterparts, my counterpart in Canada, to ensure that there is no inadequacy in the security of the northern border when we diverge resources.
So as I've talked to some of the folks you have working on the northern border in particular, the reassignment has some effects on retention. Truthfully, we've got people, I mean, it's tough on marriages when you're not living close to your family. So is DHS doing anything to reduce frequency of reassignments, or are you taking that into account?
Oh, we most certainly are, and you're absolutely right, Senator, that it puts a lot of strain on our Border Patrol agents and our field operations personnel. We're working on retention efforts. We're working on recruiting efforts. We are, of course, in the fiscal year.
How are they going, by the way? How's recruitment going? How's retention going?
I can provide you with data, specific data subsequent to this hearing, but this is an area of priority for us. It has been straining on our personnel, and the work of the Border Patrol agents and field office personnel is extraordinary.
Okay, so I will tell you, we got a long ways to go, and I say this same speech in front of the VA committee too. We got to hire nurses and docs for the VA, but having been a former ranking member on this committee and now chair of the Defense Committee, I can tell you that there's a lot of hires that have to be made. I really don't think it's smart to have the Defense Department down on the southern border. I don't think that's what they signed up for. And so I would hope that and I know you will, but we really got to put the pedal to the metal on this.
May I speak to that very briefly, Senator?
Yep.
You know, the Department of Homeland Security has relied on the National Guard every single year, I think since 2006. I may not have the precise year.
No doubt about it.
And that is one of the reasons why, of course, that in our fiscal year 23 budget, for the first time since 2011, we're asking for more Border Patrol agents. Our attrition rate, this is department-wide, is approximately 5% thus far this fiscal year. For Customs and Border Protection, as of April 9th, it's approximately 3%. I don't know, Senator, how to annualize that, but I will get the data to you, and I do have Border Patrol hiring data as well.
So I think the point to be made here, and look, it's hard to find employees in the private sector. It's hard to find employees everywhere. But the point to be made here is there is some urgency. There's been urgency for 15 years, maybe longer, to get people to the border that are trained, qualified, and able to do the job. It's a different job. And by the way, I applaud your efforts on the National Guard because it's a different job. It's a different job than the National Guard does. And so that's important. When we're pulling folks off the northern border and putting them to the southern border, you know as well as I do that the bad guys know where the weakest link in the chain is. That's where they're going to go. And they'll go to the northern border to come across if they want to do something bad. How do you stop that from being true? I mean, the focus is on the southern border, rightfully so, I get it. But the truth is that the northern border could become a problem too if, in fact, these surges aren't operated correctly.
I would say three three prongs of action come immediately to mind. Number one, extraordinarily talented personnel who know how to identify the threats and address them swiftly. Number two, technology as a force multiplier. Number three, critical partnership with our Canadian counterparts to the north.
I got a statement, then I got with the chairman's consent. Our ports in Montana are still operating at reduced hours. We've got supply chain issues in this country. We get a lot of stuff out of Canada. We send a lot of stuff north to Canada. There's still some vaccine issues with truck drivers that I wish we could. I know it's a fight between the CDC, but we got supply chain issues, and if we want to solve it, trucking is one of the ways to get products into this country. With reduced port hours and the mandate on vaccines, it's a problem. And I'm not saying that people weren't doing this stuff for the best intentions, but I don't think we can have it both ways, okay? The second thing I wanted, and this is a question, so I'd like to get those ports opened up if possible. A lot of talk about drugs. A lot of talk about drugs coming from the south in Montana. I heard Shaheen talk about it in New Hampshire. She may have talked about it earlier in this committee. The first question is are these coming through on backpacks of illegal immigrants, or are they coming through our ports and trucks and cars?
Senator, the narcotics come through primarily the ports, or they're sought to come through primarily through the ports of entry, in cars and trucks, and we have interdicted more narcotics than over the past 4 years. We've done a remarkable job. And interestingly, I've heard a lot of statistics about the rise in fentanyl. The number of opioid deaths, overdose deaths in 2020 increased over 2019 by, I think, over 50%. So the opioid crisis has been an enduring crisis year in and year out, and we've got to tackle the underlying issues. But in terms of the interdiction, we've done a better job than ever before, and that's once again because of the great work of CBP.
All right. Thank you.
Senator Capito.
Thank you. Thank you. On that issue of narcotics, obviously my state has the highest percentage per capita of deaths by overdose from opioids. It's a very, very sad situation, and it is coming from the southern border. So when you think about it, when you have this flood of humanity coming over, and with, I think, not enough deterrence or no deterrence in some cases, it diverts your workforce away from interdicting these drugs, because we know they're coming in. We also know that the more people that come in puts more money in the hands of the cartels, which allows them to up their ability to have a more robust drug trade. So there is a correlation here, and I'm concerned about that. I want to ask you, I do want to make a quick comment, too, about the Disinformation Governance Board. I know that you have a large Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Why should we continue to fund them if you're creating a whole nother, establishing a new board or working groups? What's wrong with what they're doing in this area?
So I'm going to respond to both questions in reverse order. I'll take the working group, the Disinformation Governance Board, which doesn't have its separate budget. What it is doing is drawing personnel from different parts of the department, including the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, including the Office for Privacy, including the Office of the General Counsel, by way of example, to make sure that these experts are actually developing the guidelines and standards that should have been in place for many years that haven't been, to ensure that this critical mission-focused activity of stopping threats to the homeland that are created by disinformation intended to harm us is addressed in a way that does not infringe on fundamental rights. And so the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties is involved in the working group, and as are the other offices and the operators themselves. CBP, who addresses disinformation propagated by the cartels, who provide disinformation for the express purpose of having migrants with false information come to our
But aren't
border.
you actually telling me that we're already doing this?
Senator, we've been doing the disinformation work for years, but what we haven't had is sufficient standards and policies in place and harmonized efforts so that the efforts in different parts of the department are not in conflict with one another, abide by fundamental rights and responsibilities.
Let's go to the drug question because I'm going to run out.
So the drugs primarily are sought to be brought into the United States through the ports of entry, through the trucks and cars.
Right.
And what we have done through the able use of technology and operational talent, such as the forward operating labs, is interdict more drugs than in prior years. And
Well, I mean, you don't know how much is getting through, but I can tell you it's getting through, and it's getting through to a lot of places and causing lots of heartache. Let me ask you this. The 250,000 people that are so ably working at the Department of Homeland Security, and I express my appreciation to all of them, are they all back to work?
They are.
No remote?
I'm sorry, no.
Is there remote work still, or are they all back in
Oh,
your
well,
offices?
there are different mechanisms. They're all working.
Well, I know.
but
I'm asking if they're back physically to work. Have
No,
you
some-
lifted the restrictions?
Some of them are working remotely.
And why is that?
Because we believe in remote work as a capacity to deliver to workforce if the mission allows it, if the quality of the work is not compromised, as a benefit to our...
So that's going to, a permanent change that's going to have occurred. Is that what you're saying?
That's been ongoing for years, a move to
Are more people remote working than there were before COVID?
I'd have to get that number for you, Senator.
Okay, real quick, on the USCIS, the fee issue, you haven't moved forward with a new rule to help cover the costs. The last administration proposed a fee increase, but left-wing advocacy groups sued to block it in court and further limited the agency's resources. You mentioned that they've made a special consideration for work permits because of the backlog. Are you planning on coming forward with a proposed fee increase? When would that be, and how much cost would you be covering with that?
So our personnel, our financial personnel at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services are working diligently to finalize the proposed fee rule.
And that will have a raise in the fee?
Oh, yes. Yes, it would.
When would we expect that, do you think?
I can get to you the precise time frame, Senator.
Okay, can I ask one last question? On the asylum officer rule, you've put a lot of stock in this in your 6-point plan that this is going to have a great effect of expediting the asylum claims and the removal. So if somebody comes to an asylum officer, they have to have their claim heard, you said, I think, within 24 months. Is that with the 2 years or 1 year?
Senator, I've set forth in the memorandum that I issued describing our detailed 6-pillar plan that the asylum rule is an element.
Right.
But I don't want to overstate because it's going to require a ramp-up time. It goes into effect at the end of this month. As I mentioned, the personnel at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services are not, the staffing is not at the level that we need it to be, so it's going to require a ramp-up. But the timelines in the asylum officer rule apply not only to the asylum officer themselves, but also to the immigration court judges should individuals receive a negative ruling, an adverse ruling from the asylum officer. They have a right to appeal.
Right.
That's what our law provides, due process. But the immigration judges under the asylum rule will be operating within a timeline as well.
Is that the whole thing, 2 years? Because if you get a no and you can appeal it to the judge, are we back to the 6 to 8 year timeline?
Oh, no, it's all in.
All in is 2 years?
All in.
I'm concerned that this might be more of a pull factor, and I'm sure that this is one of the considerations that you have. So I guess my last question would be, what metrics are you going to use to determine whether this has been successful? Is it going to be the amount of time that you've heard the claim, the amount of denials that have occurred, the amount of people that have been removed after their denial? What kind of metrics are you going to set up to make sure that we're measuring this and we can see whether it's been successful or not?
I think there are a number of metrics. Number one, of course, and I don't mean to say number one is the top, but
right.
Just to identify the different metrics, Senator. Speed.
So the timeline.
The timeline. Because the principle here is justice delayed is justice denied, regardless of the disposition. Two are the rates of approval and denial or denial aberrant with respect to the parallel process of immigration court proceedings. Three, how effectively are we managing the outcomes of the asylum officer rule adjudications?
So that would be, are you removing, or is that what you're saying at number
yes.
3? I mean, I would anticipate, isn't the law that if you are denied a claim that you would be removed from the country?
Oh, that is indeed the case, Senator. And if I may make one note, we have more than 11 million undocumented individuals in this country, and our enforcement processes cannot address it, nor necessarily should they with respect to each and every individual, for reasons I have articulated in memoranda. And it just speaks to the compelling and urgent need for legislation to fix our broken immigration system.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think these are all really important questions. I think as you dramatically reduce the amount of time that it takes to process a claim, I can't help but think that won't have a deterrent effect. But I also appreciate the fact that this can't happen without continued appropriations. The fee structure just simply does not provide enough resources, no matter how high you raise that fee, in order to move this time from 8 years down to 2 years. And so this committee did the right thing by coming together and providing some supplemental appropriations to USCIS to deal with the backlog. That's going to have to be an ongoing commitment of this committee to get that time down to a point that it is both fair but also an effective deterrent for those who are seeking to abuse the asylum process. With that, with no other members seeking questions before the committee, we're going to hold the record open until May 11th for members to submit questions for the record. I appreciate it if the department could respond as soon as possible. And with that, this subcommittee meeting is adjourned.